And it's my great pleasure now to welcome David Chandler, who's going to be talking for the next hour, 55 minutes. But without further ado, I would like to hand over to David. David.
Hi, I'm David Chandler. I've retired from teaching physics and math for about 40 years. At high school and junior college level, I've been involved with architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth since about 2006. And a lot of my early work was done under their auspices. I'm currently the coordinator for scientists for 9/11 Truth, and I'm on the board of International Center for 9/11 Justice. And I've done a bunch of stuff on the World Trade Center buildings as a team. Okay, some of my colleagues, I'm going to be reading this, otherwise I'll never get through it in an hour. Some of my colleagues who have done so much of the heavy lifting on the World Trade Center research have tried to discourage me from getting involved researching the Pentagon. The Pentagon research contributes little to our overall understanding about the nature of the 9/11 events, but it's become a wedge issue to divide the movement. However, ceding the argument to the various factions that push the claim that all the evidence is faked discredits the truth movement as a whole. It leads to one rabbit hole after another. Scientists for 9/11 Truth believes it is important to look at the hard evidence, take it seriously, and to see what it has to tell us. If we are really a truth movement, then it's our job to rigorously seek the truth. We need to resolve this issue. The central question that divides the 9/11 Truth movement is whether or not the Pentagon was hit by American Airlines Flight 77, flying from Dulles Airport with passengers on board. If it was not hit by a plane, or if it was not hit by that flight, it hardly matters what alternative mechanism caused the damage. Passengers got on that flight at Dulles. What happened to them? If we assert that AA-77 did not hit the Pentagon, then the story becomes much darker than it already is. Did passenger DNA end up in the Pentagon or not? Yes, it did. And there was a major effort involving over 1,000 people and multiple agencies to search for and identify the human remains of the victims, just as was done at the World Trade Center. Finding evidence to establish whether the Pentagon was hit by a plane, a large plane, or 757, have been intermediate research goals, but those are merely stepping stones to establishing whether it was actually Flight AA-77. DNA was found for all but one passenger, including 5 unknown persons of Middle Eastern descent, of Middle Eastern origin, 2 of them being brothers. An interactive graphical database, which can be run on a Windows PC, is called Pentagon Scene, was put into the evidence in the Zacarias Moussaoui trial. That's what's being shown here. By the way, you can download that and run it on your own PC and explore it. Another key to identifying the plane is the flight data recorder, or FDR, which traces the flight all the way from the Dulles Airport to the Pentagon. One of the things we will look at is why it is reasonable to conclude this data is authentic and why it is unreasonable to conclude otherwise. By the way, these 2 graphs, the one on top shows the radar data from various stations compiled. Even though the transponder was turned off, there was radar recordings. The one at the bottom is the flight data recorder track, and they agree. Overlapping radar records obtained from multiple agencies, both military and civilian, give complete coverage of the flight even though the transponder was turned off. These sources agree with each other, with the FDR data, and with the vast majority of the eyewitnesses. This map shows the location of just a few of the many eyewitnesses to the flight path of the plane that hit the Pentagon. Many of them testified to seeing the actual impact and described the plane. Frank Legg, an Australian scientist and 9/11 researcher who died in 2016, compiled a list of public statements from 188 eyewitnesses. Others have compiled similar lists. Other evidence of the flight path and impact can be found in the external and internal damage path. Any theory other than Flight AA-77 being the plane results in declaring some or all of this evidence to have been faked. The problem is that claims of faked evidence weaken the argument, and claims of fakery themselves need to be proved. Once you start throwing out inconvenient evidence, the logic of the problem becomes, what are you going to use to prove your own alternate theory? We have to take evidence seriously. Here's a compilation of eyewitness testimony taken from the Pentagon plane puzzle video that was put together by Ken Jenkins.
Over 180 witnesses are on record describing what they saw at the Pentagon on the morning of 9/11. 127 witnesses said they saw a large plane.
Tell me exactly what you saw.
I saw a plane going down, big plane, commercial liner type, going down full speed, just inside the side of the Pentagon. It was a big plane.
I saw a large airliner-sized plane.
It looked like a big-sized plane. It was definitely a passenger plane.
That's a huge airplane.
26 witnesses identified the plane they saw as an American Airlines plane. 7 witnesses identified the plane they saw as a Boeing 757.
The huge airplane looks to me like a 757 American Airlines.
I saw it was an American Airlines 757.
It was a Boeing 757 American Airlines, no question. 757.
When I looked up, I see this plane, the 757.
There was a jet, what looked to be an American Airlines jet, probably a 757.
It was an American Airlines plane that came in and hit the Pentagon.
It was an American Airlines jet. You could read the AA on the side, silver fuselage.
63 witnesses saw the plane impact the Pentagon.
It looked like a commuter plane, 2 engines come down from the south, real low, proceed right on and crashed right into the Pentagon.
Plane went west to east, hit the west side of the Pentagon.
And I saw it hit.
Slammed right into the building, huge explosion.
The next thing we saw, that airplane crashed in the Pentagon.
13 witnesses saw the plane hit one or more of the 5 downed light poles.
I looked up and I saw this American Airlines jet coming in very low, and I watched it, and it clipped. I don't know if you can see it over here. It clipped this pole. I saw it clip these poles.
4 witnesses saw the plane hit the fence and generator trailer.
Evidence can be circumstantial, testimonial, forensic, etc. The strongest evidence by far is direct physical evidence or hard evidence. My approach is to take the evidence seriously, especially the hard evidence. This doesn't mean we should believe everything we're told. It means we don't start with the arbitrary assumption that anything touched by the government should be discarded. The government is a huge bureaucracy. The vast majority of government workers do their specialized jobs honestly and competently. Even if we believe the government was involved in the planning and execution of the 9/11 events, the number of people on the inside of that plot would be very small. This means we need to evaluate each piece of evidence on its own merits and use our discernment to determine the validity and whether there are signs that it's been tampered with. Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth, in its original incarnation, an organization that I was proud to be a part of back in the day, focused strongly on hard evidence at the World Trade Center and rejected speculative theories such as no planes, space beams, holograms, video fakery, missiles, or mini nukes. That's how we gained traction and gave a solid foundation to the demolition hypothesis. Those fringe elements of the movement are still out there, by the way. I can't get off their mailing lists. AE provided intellectual discipline and scientific leadership in the investigation of the World Trade Center. AE made a conscious choice to declare the Pentagon to be out of scope for its own investigations because the dominant experience of its members was buildings. The downside of this decision was it left the Pentagon question open to become the Wild West, where speculative theories were allowed to flourish and be promoted uncritically. Speculative quasi-research discredits the movement as a whole and allows the public to ignore the solid work we've done, especially regarding the World Trade Center. More recently, scientists for 9/11 Truth stepped in with the different guidelines. For us, any aspect of 9/11 events that could be studied scientifically could and should be. The 9/11 Truth movement needs to resolve the question of what hit the Pentagon based on solid evidence, so it can pull together to address the larger and more significant questions of how and why this event happened, and ultimately, what forces were at play and who was behind it. I was initially opposed to adding this Pentagon discussion as a third day of this conference because it deals with a topic that remains contentious within the movement. It feels like we're airing our dirty laundry in public. If we can't resolve this question among ourselves, what are we doing presenting it to the world? But here we are. Transparency may ultimately be good for the movement. If you're a part of the public that is not well informed about what has been going on in the 9/11 Truth community, please realize that truth, as referred to in the phrase 9/11 Truth, is not static. It's a struggle. The forces of chaos that brought us 9/11 are alive and well and do not want the truth to come out. So let's start by going back in time. One of the earliest instances of 9/11 skepticism was put forward by Thierry Masson in France, who published a photograph of a small garage door size hole in the Pentagon and declared this hole is too small for a large plane to enter. The meme that the hole is too small spread like wildfire and became the article of faith for the early 9/11 Truth movement that no plane hit the Pentagon, or at least certainly no big plane. The hole seemed to fit a missile or something else small. It turns out that Thierry Masson's small hole picture had been cropped away from its context. What we are looking at here is the whole photograph. The small hole was an opening in the second floor with about 100 feet of first floor damage beneath it, being obscured by a fire hose spray. What Thierry Masson did not show were two other photographs by the same photographer on the same roll of film just a few clicks later that showed a broad swath of damage on the ground floor. Notice that this early photograph was taken before the roof collapsed. So it's impact damage, not collapse damage. This is the other photograph. Why Thierry Masson selected a single misleading photograph and not the ones that gave a more complete description of the damage is a question worth asking. And it's not that a more complete view was not available. It was simply not shown. In a very real sense, we are here today still arguing the basic facts about the Pentagon event because of false information that took root in the movement early on. Starting in 2006, Craig Ranke and Aldo Marquis, calling themselves a citizen investigation team, promoted another theory claiming that the plane flew along a different approach path north of the Citgo gas station that bypassed the row of downed light poles and then flew over the Pentagon, obscured by a massive synchronized explosion as cover. The flyover they described as a grand magic show, fooling the eyewitnesses into believing the plane hit the building. The main upshot of their theory is that since the plane, in their view, never actually touched anything, every bit of physical evidence at the Pentagon had to have been staged. That puts their theory beyond the reach of any critique based on the physical evidence at the scene. What would have to be faked went far beyond the down light poles. They would have to fake the radar reports from multiple sources, the contents of the FDR, the damaged taxi, the notch taken out of the generator trailer, the notch taken out of the top of the tree on the overpass, the shattering of another tree beside column 16, and the massive internal damage with a directional flow to simulate a plane passing through the building, breaking and bowing columns all along the way. They would also have to fake the clear signs of impact damage to the exterior surface of the Pentagon beyond the broad first floor opening. This is the damage to the exterior, not accessible from the interior. And an exit hole punched in the inner wall of the C-ring with plane debris spilling out, as Ken Jenkins and Frank Legg asked years ago in a short but insightful paper, why not use a plane? I came into collaboration with Frank Legg as he was analyzing the evidence based on the flight path and the alternative claimed by CIT. What he showed me was that the radar path, indicated here by color-coded symbols, the flight data recorder path, indicated by the yellow line, the exterior damage path from the overpass to the Pentagon, indicated by the short red lines, and the interior damage path and the C-ring exit hole were all in perfect alignment. When Frank showed me this diagram of those features, that's what got me off the fence about whether a plane actually hit the Pentagon. That was the beginning of my Pentagon research journey. Another influence from even earlier was Jim Hoffman's complete composite photograph of the damage of to the Pentagon wall. No one photograph shows the whole extent of the damage, but if the views are pieced together as a mosaic, they show an opening where the impact by a large plane becomes plausible. As Frank Legg put it, the opening was large enough for all the heavy parts of the plane. The wingtips had to deform and be pulled into the building, and there's evidence that they did just that. Wayne Costi has accounted for the damage caused by the right and left wingtips. The right wing slapped the building, causing breakage of columns 18 and 19, which can be seen here. The brakes pushed the columns inward, which is a clear sign of impact. Some people assert that all of the Pentagon damage was from explosives, but that claim is simply not plausible in this case. Column 18 survived because the wing impacted it at the point where it was reinforced by the second floor slab, which had greater strength because it was hit edge on. Since the plane was coming in along a line 51 degrees from the Pentagon wall, the right wing essentially paralleled the wall, allowing it to virtually imprint itself on the exterior surface. Since the plane had a strong northward component to its motion along the wall, that would be down and to the right on this diagram, it was dragged along the wall and into the building. The left wing has a different story. It was angled sharply away from the wall, so the wing plowed along the wall, breaking one column at a time. The left wing broke successive columns until it met column 9AA. By that point, the plane had been slowed a bit. The less massive outer end of the wing met the column. Column 9AA was left unbroken. It was stripped of most of its concrete and severely bowed in the direction of motion. But the fact that it was not broken shows the wing blocked the plane from doing damage further along the wall. The wingtip was not lying in the rubble outside the Pentagon, so it had to have been dragged in. Column 9AA was hit near its midpoint, which tells us that the left wing was horizontal as it entered the building. So the entire left wing entered on the first floor. However, around columns 11 and 12, we can see the second floor slab was impacted. This is a more close-up view. Since the left wing was entirely underneath the slab, the only thing sticking up to damage the slab was the tail of the plane. The tail broke the beams at the edge of the slab and dragged it down, allowing the bricks around the windows to fall away, as shown here. The offset of this damage from the point of entry, which is column 14, point of entry of the nose, was due to a horizontal rotation caused by the early asymmetric impacts of the right wing from the generator trailer in the south wall. The fact that the tail damage did not extend further up the wall tells us the tail, which angled backward, was also dragged into the building, like the wingtips. Some ask for evidence of the massive engines. The engines did indeed have very strong titanium components, but the engines were assemblies of components that broke apart during the multiple impacts with columns inside the building. Here is a collection of plane parts, many identifiable as belonging to a 757, from Ken Jenkins' video, The Pentagon Plane Puzzle. Now here's not relevant, but I think we're supposed to do this now. Here it comes. Let us look now at the alternate approach path promoted by the CIT group. Craig Ranke interviewed Ed Pike at his car repair shop on Columbia Pike, west of the Navy Annex. Mr. Pike's testimony was that the plane flew overhead toward the Pentagon. The CIT story is that the plane diverted from there to go around the north side of the Citgo station before flying over the Pentagon at the nominal impact point. The problem is, at the speed of the plane, at the time of past the repair shop, it had only 5 seconds to get to the Pentagon. There was no time for that maneuver. CIT imagines that the plane banked left and rolled and banked right to go around the Citgo station. Frank Legg and I independently calculated the required bank angles for this high-speed maneuver. It would be on the order of 80 degrees, and the corresponding lateral G forces would be on the order of 10 Gs, which would be unsurvivable by the plane and by the people in the plane. Also, the roll time from left bank to right bank would be entirely impossible in that 5-second time frame. Frank and I published 2 papers about this research. The north of Citgo flight path, when paired with Ed Pike's testimony, is simply impossible. I've analyzed the testimony of 2 of CIT's witnesses in great depth. You can find these interviews and analysis on my site, 911speakout.org. By the way, Wayne Costi and I have a massive collection of Pentagon evidence, 17 videos, We broke it up from one massive 5-hour PowerPoint, but it's like 10, 15-minute snippets. You can have them for bedtime stories. You can learn about the evidence at the Pentagon from that, and it's all on that site. Just look under the Pentagon tab. Sergeant Lagasse was at the Citgo station. Okay, so Albert Hemphill was looking from the Navy Annex to this office, upper floor, overlooking directly at where the impact point was, and his line of sight was directly over the Citgo gas station. As you can see there, the Citgo station is in the foreground, where that red line is its line of sight. And Sergeant Lagasse was at the Citgo station itself. Both witnesses testify that the plane passed through the light poles and went into the Pentagon. Frank Legg calculated that if the plane touched any of the light poles, it would be too low to pull up and fly over the Pentagon. The red line is Albert Hemphill's line of sight. He described the plane as coming over his right shoulder. That would put it to the south of the Citgo station, consistent with the physical damage. When asked if the plane was as far south as the VDOT radio tower, that's the Virginia Department of Transportation radio tower, he estimated it was probably not that far, but he's still talking about something to the right, to the south. Some have tried to interpret Hemphill's statement as saying the plane crossed over his right shoulder and was coming north of the station and then coming around back, but that has the same problem as the earlier Ed Pike testimony. It simply could not do such a tight maneuver in that amount of time. It's, I believe, 3 seconds from the Navy Annex to the Pentagon. Sergeant Lagasse was interviewed by Craig Ranke at the Citgo station in 2006, 5 years after the event. The most detailed documentation of the interview was CIT's video Pentagon. That's an earlier one that has a whole lot of extra material in it, stuff that was cut away for the more polished version, which was, forget the name, it's the one that Craig mentioned. Anyway, so Pentagon has the details surrounding the interview. For my analysis, see 9/11 Speak Out and look on the Pentagon page again. So here is a snippet from that interview.
But these were the light poles. This is where the taxi cab was, right here, not over here. Nothing happened over here, period.
Okay. What he's pointing out is where he thinks the light poles were. He's getting the light poles in the wrong place. He's putting them someplace where they weren't. But he's putting them right along the path that he drew, which tells you he believes the path he drew, that he was drawing that through the light poles. He was wrong about the positioning of his path, which is shown in the black over here, but he was correct that it went through the light poles. The red line shows the actual light pole path, and he refused to acknowledge that as the light pole path when Craig pointed it out to him, because that line should actually be 51 degrees away from the Pentagon wall. And here it looks more like 10 or 15 degrees. So this distorted photograph, it's not distorted in a distortion sense. It was a misleading photograph, strong perspective. That was what Craig gave him to record his path on. Notice that most of the picture is material that's north of Citgo. It's a strongly biased base photograph for him to draw his line on. If he had had an unbiased photograph, this one is from Google Earth looking straight down. You can see that the light pole path doesn't look like it's squashed up against the Pentagon wall at all. If this had been the picture that Lagasse had to go from, he would have recognized the light pole path was the path of the plane, because he knew that the plane that he was talking about was the one that went through the light pole. Craig Ranke kept framing the question as where the plane was when it passed the Citgo station. But that was not Lagasse's focus. According to his own testimony, Sergeant Lagasse was under the canopy of the station, facing south, talking with his dog in his car. He was an explosive detection unit. He was talking to the car. So he's facing south into the car, and he's under the canopy. He could not possibly have seen, even though he testifies to seeing it at a certain point, he could not possibly have seen the plane at that early time. So this is self-contradictory evidence. So what he must have witnessed was the very, if you can just imagine it, here's a plane very low, flying at over 500 miles an hour right over the station. It was an auditory initial response. He was probably in shock. When he first saw the plane, it's when it emerged and it was actually moving toward the Pentagon. His description of his path, as he was drawing his path, he said, well, it's like this, but the angle's not right. You can hear him say that as he's drawing his path. What angle is he talking about? The only reasonable thing is he's talking about the angle that the path made with the wall of the Pentagon, that it should have been further over, but he couldn't make that work out with that perspective drawing. It's interesting to note that when CIT, when these guys presented their results to the public, they transcribed the paths drawn by the witnesses to an overhead view of Google Earth map. Why the switch? Would the witnesses have drawn these same paths if they had the overhead view map to start with? By the way, none of these CIT witness paths are physically possible due to the bank angles and lateral g-forces. These are all impossible paths that they've drawn. CIT cherry-picked their witnesses. They artificially framed the questions rather than allowing free responses, and then cherry-picked the testimony given by their witnesses. We will hear more from Sergeant Lagasse later. Here's the final approach. Let's shift our attention to the final approach path from the overpass to the Pentagon wall. There are 5 light poles, a traffic camera pole, a tree on the overpass, a large generator trailer from the Pentagon refurbishment project, and the low concrete retaining wall. Each of these objects has scars from the incoming plane. The first and third light poles were hit solidly by the right wing and fragmented. However, the second light pole was bent and knocked over at the base, but did not break, indicating it was skimmed by the left wingtip. That gives us a precise location of the plane at that point. The tree on the overpass has a circular notch cut out of the top, leaving twigs that are stripped, like scooping it out by a dull blade. The camera pole has a scar and a missing rung, indicating it was hit by the right wingtip. Now, if you do the measurement, the distance from the second light pole to the camera pole scar, measuring perpendicular to the flight path, gives you a distance that exactly matches the wingspan of a 757, 125 feet. Also, the position of the notch in the tree is exactly where the right engine would pass if it's a 757. So a 757 matches the damage any other size plane or a missile does not. If we move to the generator trailer and the low retaining wall, which were near the Pentagon, the notches found in these 2 items exactly match the spacing of the engines of a 757. Again, a 757 matches the damage. A 737 or any other smaller plane does not. The kicker here is, if you consider the 3 points of contact at the overpass and the 2 points of contact near the Pentagon wall, the line connecting these points exactly matches the direction of motion given in the flight data recorder. If the flight data recorder had data that was off by even a degree, these would not line up. There's another source of information about the plane along this approach path, namely the imagery from the 2 security cameras at the entry of the parking lot. The plane is a small, fuzzy image near the edge of the distorted wide-angle video frame. Can you see it? It's there. Here it is again, but this time I've outlined it in yellow. Maybe you can see it, maybe you can't. Here it is, enlarged. The plane can be made more visible by blinking the frame containing the plane with the previous frame that lacks the plane. So going back and forth between the two, which I'm doing here, your eyes have a tendency to recognize things that change between the two images. I've also outlined it at some point here. So that's what you're looking for. This is what's shown, but it's shown, this is greatly enlarged. It's originally a small fuzzy thing on the corner of the field. Okay. And here's the other camera. Notice mainly you're seeing a tail stick up, and you're seeing the smoke path, which is an elongation of the previous smoke path. Okay. Keep in mind the right engine has just scooped out the foliage from the top of the tree at the overpass, and this can account for the unexpected smoke trail. Jets don't give off smoke trails, rockets do. This was one of the early arguments I heard, that it was a missile, it wasn't a plane. But it can be understood as a plane, given that it had just ingested this burnable material. Let's move on. Here's the next frame of the video. So the previous frame is the one that showed the plane. What do you see here? I looked at this picture with new eyes just a few weeks ago as I was preparing this talk, and I saw something I had never paid attention to before. Do you see a thin, wispy cloud of smoke hovering along the lawn? I've outlined it there. Okay, what is that? That's the same smoke trail we were seeing just a minute ago. Okay. This reminds me of Alice in Wonderland, where the Cheshire Cat disappears gradually, leaving only his grin. Alice says, "I've often seen a cat without a grin. I've never seen a grin without a cat." This thin smoke trail is the grin without the cat, as the plane erupts into a fireball and crashes through the Pentagon wall. We're not seeing the plane stop short and blow up somewhere on the Pentagon lawn. We are not seeing it rise up and fly over the Pentagon. We can see the streak of smoke leading right from where we saw it a moment ago, directly into the fireball itself. Remember, the source of the smoke is the tree. This streak of smoke is evidence of a continuous path from the tree on the overpass through the trail of light poles to the point of impact with the Pentagon wall. The thin smear of smoke is the record of the plane's motion in between the 1 second frames. That transforms what's essentially a slideshow of 1 second frames into a vivid representation of the motion of the plane. We don't need to invoke pre-planted explosives to account for what we're seeing here. We are seeing the fireball from the plane breaking through the wall. We have the testimony of an eyewitness who was a certified explosives expert whose job was handling a bomb-sniffing dog. He witnessed this fireball and testified very clearly to what he saw. He was interviewed by Craig Ranke at the Citgo gas station directly across from the impact near the Pentagon. This is a free-form testimony from Sergeant Lagasse when the conversation was not being controlled by Craig Ranke.
0% chance it was a missile. 0% chance it was a global hawk, which is a new one.
No bomb that was thrown into the building.
And like I said, detonation versus deflagration. Yeah, there was an explosion, but it was not a detonation. It was a deflagration. And all the junior scientists out there can figure that out. I'm an explosive detection canine handler. I know about explosives. I've seen enough of them go off when we blow up our own training aids for tests and for demos. It wasn't a detonation, it was a deflagration.
Okay, CIT, this is your witness. He said, 0% chance it was a missile, 0% chance it was a Global Hawk, no bomb, detonation versus deflagration. There was an explosion, but it was not a detonation. He said, I'm an explosive detection canine handler. I know about explosives. It was a deflagration, and he repeated that statement several times. A deflagration without the physical impact of the plane could not have created the hole in the Pentagon. A detonation from high explosives, however, propagates supersonically, creating a powerful shock wave that can do real damage. And it produces a distinctive, sharp, percussive sound. That distinctive sound was missing. So Sergeant Lagasse's testimony contradicts not only the CIT flyover theory, but all the theories that have been put forward other than large plane impact, since all of the other theories require explosives to carve out the observed damage to the Pentagon wall. No explosives. Here's what a true explosion looks like. That's a tank. I think it was a drone that flew over. Okay, we've seen a lot of those recently, unfortunately. Here, by contrast, is a deflagration, a slowly developing fireball of burning jet fuel. Remember, in the detonation, it was sudden expansion to the full extent of the explosion, and then it just sort of went up in flames from there. Here, it's a fireball is just sort of billowing out and gradually expands. So if you look at those. Okay, here's what we see at the Pentagon. Here's the first sign of this whatever is happening at the wall. Number 2, 3, 4, 5. Keep in mind, those are at 1-second intervals. You're seeing something developing over 5 seconds here, not something that goes kaboom and is suddenly at maximum extent, like a supersonic expansion of gases. We are seeing a plane crash into the Pentagon, pure and simple. The burning fuel comes from the plane. The smoke trail comes from the tree on the overpass. It all hangs together. We are seeing what Sergeant Lagasse described. I said earlier the FDR data was in alignment with the radar and damage path data, but there's a caveat. The FDR takes sensor readings of many things going on in the plane multiple times per second. One of the measurements gives the direction of motion. It's a direct reading and it's highly precise. Another set of data is the position of the plane in 3 dimensions. However, position is not a direct reading. The inertial guidance system measures the small changes in position of the plane and calculates the current position by adding up the small changes. Each term in this sum has a small measurement error, and in summing up the terms, we get a cumulative error, producing what is known as data drift. In practice, in the pre-GPS era, readings from ground stations along the flight path would be used to correct the data drift. At the time of impact at the Pentagon, the computed path had drifted a bit to the north, but the direction of motion remained precise. We can correct for the drift by dragging the FDR path while keeping it parallel with the original until it aligns with key markers on the ground. When Frank Legg died, I had been working with him and I was left with his calculations, but I didn't know exactly what offset he used to bring the FDR path into alignment, so I decided to do it from scratch so I'd understand it for myself. Okay, here's the vicinity of the Pentagon shown in Google Earth. The Pentagon is here on the right. I've constructed a plane here the size of a 757. I've actually done this twice. I have the 757 and the 737 as 2 options. Let's stick with the 757. If I take the nose of the plane, here's where the engines would be and here's where the wingtips would be. These direction lines indicate the direction of motion as indicated in the flight data recorder. I can take the actual positioning and move it around because there's data drift and we would need to correlate the position with the facts on the ground. Here is the path of the plane as computed by Frank Legg, and it goes through the hole in the wall of the Pentagon and it has the direction of motion indicated in the flight data recorder, the same as these. Okay, if I move the plane to Frank Legg's track, notice that it clips the second light pole substantially. It should have broken the light pole if this were the case. Down here, the right wingtip misses the camera pole. This shadow here is the camera pole shadow, and the base of the pole, if you come straight up vertically toward the viewer, is where the scar would be. So my hypothesis was that the wingtip actually created the scar, so I put it through the base of the camera pole, and what do you know? The left wingtip touches but does not substantially impact the second light pole. The second light pole was found down here on the lawn, bent 90 degrees and knocked over, but it wasn't broken. Notice also I have constructed here with these little arrows this point, which is the location of the notch in the tree. I did this by comparing this view with a side view and locating where that notch actually was. And notice that if I position the plane so that the left wingtip just skims the second light pole, the right wingtip skims the camera pole, the right engine, which is this orange line right here, passes right through the notch in the tree. If I project using the direction of motion indicated in the flight data recorder, I come up here to the features that are close to the Pentagon wall. This is the generator trailer right here, and notice that the right engine goes through one end of the generator trailer, and the left engine goes through this retaining wall over here. This is a concrete feature, and there's a retaining wall at this edge of it, and that impacts correctly. So by positioning the plane as I've done here, I get 5 points of contact just by positioning 1 point exactly. So I could basically just take the plane and put it so the left wingtip passes through the second light pole, and I get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 points of contact that are correctly shown on this assumption. If I did a 737, I have a smaller wingspan. Notice if I position that so that the left wingtip just touches the second light pole, which is required, by the way, to see the second light pole bent but not broken. Notice that the right wingtip does not come anywhere near the camera pole, and neither engine, the right engine here, does not go through the notch in the tree. So it does not fit. So a 737 does not fit the evidence. 757 fits it perfectly. Here's a close-up view of the scar and the missing rung on the Virginia Department of Transportation, VDOT camera pole. And here's the second light pole lying on the ground with a 90-degree bend and knocked over, but not shattered by the wing. It was clearly grazed by the wingtip. So this is the path of the plane that best fits the physical evidence. It fits better than on Frank Legg's original attempt, whereas the previous positioning of the path accounted for the damage approximately, the adjusted path accounts for it precisely. What makes the 3 points near the overpass align perfectly with the 2 points near the Pentagon wall was the direction of motion recorded in the FDR. In other words, the alignment validates the authenticity of the FDR data. If the direction of motion given in the FDR were off by even a degree, the alignment would not match the facts on the ground. There's further validation in the last data entries where the circumstances of the actual impact are recorded. Without the final frame, the plane was stuck high in the air back near the Navy Annex. With the final frame restored, the plane is shown coming all the way down to the entrance hole in the Pentagon wall. None of what I've said here today is a result of believing the government narrative. It's a result of following the evidence. When there's a question of authenticity, I've looked to the data itself to judge its internal consistency and look for evidence of fakery. What I found instead was internal consistency and close correspondence of the data with the facts on the ground. What I did not find were proof of or even plausibility of fakery. It is my contention that it's time for the 9/11 truth movement to become a truth movement. We need to set aside the years of accumulated mythology and speculation and coalesce around the hard evidence, just like what happened at the World Trade Center. Commercial flights with passengers on board were crashed into buildings. We are seeing the results of Flight AA-77 crashed into the Pentagon. I'll stop there.